Okay, so today I'm gonna be talking about 2064 Read-Only Memories, which is an indie story click-based adventure game. This game being a click-based story, a visual novel basically, is not very gameplay heavy. And I think that games as a medium of storytelling is something that's definitely interesting and something that can definitely be useful. So just as an example, I admittedly have very short attention span. I can't really pay attention to reading like a full-length novel in one sitting. I used to be able to, but I can't anymore. Sometimes I can't even like sit and pay attention to TV shows or movies because it's just to just sit there and watch the story unfold is such, I don't know, it takes a lot of energy for me to focus on it. But when you have a game like this, a visual novel game, it has that interactive factor where you are a part of the story, and it does a lot for immersion into the world of the story that's being told. But things that I do have to say about the gameplay is, first of all, I really like the way that they did the interface of the game. Whenever you open the conversation with someone, instead of them being like in the middle of the landscape when you speak to them and when you approach them, they turned that side pop-up window, that lips window, which also had your like menu items options there. So they turned that side menu part into where you would see the character that you're speaking to. So you could still see like the landscape, but at the same time you would have that little window of the characters. They did the dialogue voice acting for the entire script of the game. The only things that were not voice acted was the player's dialogue, because you play as yourself or whoever you choose to be in this world. Yeah, everything was voiced out, so it really felt like an interactive show. Because some games, they will voice out certain parts of the dialogue, but say if it's a whole paragraph, they won't voice the whole paragraph. They'll maybe narrate the first two lines, and then the rest is just you read it on your own. So it was nice to have the voice and the written out part together. But the one issue that I did have with this was because it was all narrated. The speed that the text would roll out in the dialogue bar was pretty slow, and there was no setting for you to adjust it. A lot of games would have a setting for it, but this one didn't. I assume it is because they had the dialogue there. You could always like you would press enter and then all the text would load. And I mean, sure, it's great because you get to appreciate the dialogue, but sometimes it can be a bit annoying to have to read through all of that or just hit enter lots and lots of times to skip through it. For example, when I was playing the final chapter, I forgot to save at all throughout playing chapter 5 and 6. The game's 6 chapters long. And then the game hung when I was like really near the end of the game, and then I had to restart the game, and I didn't save at all that night. So I had to replay chapter 5 and 6, and because I had already played it once and just wanted to get back to where I was, I had to sit through all the dialogue again. You can't skip the dialogue because that's the main part of the game. So I was just like go faster. But then at the same time, it was a little bit unresponsive too. So I was pressing enter so many times, half the time it wouldn't detect me pressing enter. So there's pros and cons to them having that full dialogue and the text speed being like that, I suppose. So in any other case, I would have spoken about the universe that the game is in before I spoke about any of my criticisms, but given the story-based nature of this game, that's why I did the gameplay first, and now I'm going to talk about the story. And I'm hoping I won't speak about this for too long, mostly because I'm scared that I would give some spoilers about the game. First of all, what drew me to play this game in the first place was the world that it was set in, the time that it was set in, and it was something that I generally find very interesting, and I don't know whether other people would, but I read the description of the game and it just felt right up my alley. So the game takes place in the year 2064, as the name suggests, and in this future, everybody except you have their own like personal robot assistant companion thing, and it's still a pretty new technology, so like the AI capabilities of the robot is pretty bare bones, and most of the robots are kind of stuck to one specific use. Like either you would have a personal one, and there was one that was a water like a water machine robot. So in place of having a water dispenser, they had a robot that would give you water, and like a waiter coffee shop robot. There was a receptionist robot, you know, stuff like that. So each robot had its own like different role. And that's not all, that's not even the whole story. So like technology was a really big deal in this story, because aside from that, you also had things like people were getting augmented enhancements to their body. You could get yourself mutated to be like part animal. You could get enhancements to your eyes so that you can see beyond the normal range of human vision. There was one character that was a mutant human cat hybrid. I'm sorry, is it mutant? No, it's not mutant. I'm gonna stop saying mutant. So she was like a human cat hybrid to fix an issue because she had a skin condition that was like so severe that the only way that they could fix it was they had to rewrite her whole DNA to be furry instead of like human skin. So there was just like so many interesting things happening, you know. There was the robots, there was the human, there was like the human hybrid thing, and like that one was like semi-relevant plot point actually, because part of the storyline involved people. What was it? I keep losing my train of thought when I record these videos. These videos take so long for me to record because I forget what I'm saying. Yeah, so there was this big fight between the people who got these surgeries done, be it the extreme ones like the cat lady or just the simple ones like the character with the eye enhancements, versus the human revolution. And these people were like naturalists and they believed like, oh, God made us this way, we shouldn't be doing anything to our body. And like, yeah, so there would be riots between the two groups and big fights and like governments not wanting to give, and tension between the community of hybrids versus the government not knowing whether their rights should be the same as humans or as animals, things like that, you know. So yeah, it was quite a political game. But the main storyline was that one day an acquaintance of yours, this guy named Hayden, goes missing, and you find out because his robot came to visit you and it's like, hey, I need help me look for Hayden. And his robot was really unique. That robot wasn't as low level intelligence as all the other robots. It was pretty close to the human level of thought capability. The only issue was that the robot was very young and its intelligence was still maturing. So technically it was like having a teenager around. So you had this little teenage robot with you. It was this whole mystery. You had to go and talk to people. You had to play some puzzles so you could break into places and find intel on the guy that went missing, and you end up uncovering some pretty nasty things about the company that made the robots. And I don't want to talk about this for too long because I am so scared that I will give spoilers unintentionally. Also, as I said earlier, there was a lot of tech in this game, and they did manage to strike a very good balance between describing the technology too in depth and making it like textbooky. And I was just like, whoa, this is really cool. I like kind of wished that in a sense I was kind of hoping that the future for us really becomes like what it was like in that game. But then later in the game, due to the conflicts that were happening in the game, I was like, that's kind of scary. Do I really want technology to be that involved in our life? So yeah, the story really did make you think about that balance of how much do we want technology to be in our lives and how much do we want to rely on it? How much control do we want these large corporations, these like millionaire companies, to have over our daily lives and what we do every day, which I think is very reflective of how life is right now. The real cyber spies aren't viruses anymore. Now it's the companies that create the very things that you buy and put in your home. So this universe in this story really played into that whole mankind is growing more and more reliant on technology. There were conflicts that did rise because of the technology that they had in that time, in that game, you know. To me, it felt like they really pieced together their story and what they wanted to tell through this game pretty well. I don't know if I'm even interpreting it right, but I interpreted it as a reflection of life right now. It's just that it had more, you know, it was future based. Let me look back at the notes. So the robot belonging to this inventor, this scientist guy, is the one that accompanies you throughout the story. Yeah, it was naive. It didn't know much about the world, and it was learning as it went throughout the game. So that robot Turing was just supposed to be, you didn't like Turing at first. It was just this inconvenience to you to have to be with it. But you could see the bond form between you, the player, and Turing throughout the game. Turing began to open up and began to question things. What am I? Who am I? What are my beliefs? And it was very refreshing to see the character grow throughout the story. And this game just was generally very, very diverse in the characters that they had. I'm not gonna like list the characters so much because I don't want to talk for too long. On one hand, I do wish that this game was a little bit more challenging, because as I mentioned earlier, it truly was just a story that the only variable on your end was the dialogue. I was kind of wondering at first if the dialogue in the game, the dialogue that you chose, would it have an effect on the gameplay? Would it affect the storyline? But it didn't. It just affected how you interacted with the characters around you and how they would respond. But it wasn't something that was very destructive, and there wasn't really a like bad ending unless you hit a certain part. For example, the puzzle bits of the game, like if you screwed up the puzzle, then the game would just game over and then you go back to the previous scene. In that sense, the game was not challenging. But how challenging would you want a game like this to be? I don't know, but it's just that sometimes if I played it for like a long period of time, I kind of would drift off a little bit mentally. Although I said that I would like this game to be more challenging, I'm really dense and some parts took a really long time for me to solve. Also, there were a lot of items that were picked up in the first few chapters, and I was wondering for the longest time. For example, there was a gun. When will I use this gun? I didn't touch the gun at all. Like, I thought it kind of felt as if the items were just there for the sake of being there, and for like, okay, someone gave you a gun, so here, if you want to look at the gun, you've got the gun. But then it got to chapter 5 and I actually had to use the gun. So I was like, oh, okay, so those things actually did need to be used. And I didn't even realize it. I forgot that the gun was there. There was some parts where you needed to use items on people, and they kind of would give you hints at it. So each character had a talk button, look button, use an item button, and then so with some of them, you would press the use an item button and it wouldn't show you your full inventory. It would only show you maybe 2 or 3 items that could be used on that character, which on one hand, from like a development standpoint, that makes sense, because each time you clicked an item that was not the thing you were supposed to use, the character would respond and they would say something like, oh, what am I gonna do with this brochure? But then at the same time, you know, they could have still left it in, but just made it like, oh, you can't use that item right now, rather than have everything be interacted with to the character, because then it kind of hints at what you need to use contextually. For example, there was a situation where your options was like an umbrella or a brochure, and between an umbrella and a brochure, I'm pretty sure those things would have very, very different like uses to them. So it's kind of obvious which thing you need at the time once they narrow it down like that. Okay, I think that that's actually all I have to say without me just going on a tangent of how much I love certain characters. Yeah, thank you for watching.
They like to party hard too.
Thank you, Starfucker.